Hey, welcome back to the channel. I know this looks bad. It looks like I gutted my car, but there are two repairs going at the same time, and this was the easiest way for me to do this. So I'm making this video because I have not been able to find a video online specifically about how to do any repairs on a 2006 or 2004 era Dodge Stratus. This is the SXT. So it has a 2.4 liter dual overhead cam engine. It's a 4-cylinder. Now, I've had this car for about a year, but it belonged to my sister before that, and then one of her friends before that. This is now 2018, so this car is running on 12, going on 13 years old. Found out back in March that I needed a radiator, and just now getting around to this repair. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to do this, but at the same time that I needed the radiator, come to find out that my alternator was going bad. And I originally assumed it was a belt because the original belt that was on there, there's no underbody protection. It had all been ripped off at one point or another from accidents or whatnot, and the belt had damage, so I repaired the belt, or replaced the belt I should say, figuring that that would take care of it, and come to find out it was actually the alternator that was going bad. I had a buddy test it for me, and it was running low on its volts. It should be 13, 14 volts, and it was running around 10. So I'm going to be seeing about getting one of those probably in the next week. Now, this looks like it's a little overkill for just, you know, taking out the alternator, taking out the radiator, but it's not as bad as it looks. This right here is where my coolant overflow would normally be, and when the radiator went out, I was having problems with the coolant overflow tank actually emptying like it was supposed to drain out the radiator so I could take out the radiator. I ended up just pulling it out of there. It's actually held on by 4 bolts. There is a 10 millimeter, 10 millimeter, and then the power steering and your canister here are both also bolted directly to the container. This is a 10 millimeter bolt, that's a 9 millimeter bolt. And then this is the container itself. Pretty basic. So that faces the firewall. This is faces towards the front of the car, and then you got your overflow hose here, which is going to go back up and snap in right here. And then of course you got your coolant's going to flow through here. Here's where your upper hose should be, and then there's the lower hose connector right, if I can get a good view here. There's your lower connector, and below the lower connector is the drain cock, or the petcock, however you want to call that. Now, with having to take out the alternator, the problem I was having with it was none of my sockets would actually fit down underneath the car to get the belt loose, which is, so here's your tensioner pulley, and if you can see, about halfway down there is a 3/8 inch socket hole that if you put a socket in there and turn it, it'll loosen up the belt will come loose, and it'll come off the alternator. This is the alternator, just being held in by 3 bolts. So you got 2 in the back, 1 in the front, and all it does is you can see those 3 holes there. There's 1, 2, and then third one down on the bottom. You just take that and line it up with this, pop the new one in, and then there's where your belt will go back on. This right here is an electrical wire connection that runs back to the battery. There's your sensor, and on this car you've got, there's your electrical connection, which has a safety cap on top of it to prevent, you know, any kind of extra contact. There's your clip, and then this piece is the electrical sensor that connects back into the alternator. So that, as a general rule, should be pretty easy. You don't need to take out the coolant reservoir to actually get to that. you should be able to do like I was trying to do and take it out from underneath the car, which you just take your tire off, and then you can see your pulleys, you can see how the belt's loose, and then the tensioner is directly above those pulleys right there, so you should just be able to reach up from underneath when you take off the tire, turn that, and the belt will come loose so you can take it off the alternator. Now in my case, none of my sockets were fitting, as I said before, so I went ahead and finally bit the bullet and went out and bought a specialty tool, which the tools really do make the difference in these cases. This is a serpentine belt tool for, well, serpentine belts, but it has a 3/8 inch socket attachment at the head there. Comes with an additional bar because you can swap out this first half right here with one that has a 1/2 inch adapter on it instead. But this is really narrow. It's let me get a good view of it here. There we go. It's really narrow. I measured it out, and that is maybe a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch wide. So you go up underneath the car and you have one of these. Just drop down in there. There is your second hole right there, and then you would just take it and turn it, push it counterclockwise, and the belt will come loose. And that's about a 15-second job if you reach it from underneath. I did it from the top this time just because I already had the coolant reservoir off. Now, to actually get the radiator out, it's a little bit more of a pain, especially unlike me, if you still have the front on your car. I had an incident last year while I was moving, and the front of my car got ripped off, so that was one last thing I had to deal with. But if you still had the front of your car on, you would have all of your underbody protections. So you'd have to pull out everything that covers up under here, underneath the front of the bumper. And then once that's off, you've got a series of snaps that hold the bumper in place, which you have to take out, take the bumper off, and then you can get to all this. Now this is, we'll start with this. This is actually the front of the car where the hood latch goes. Now when this is in place, you've got, would sit, sit still for a minute, would sit up there like that. So these two bolts right here are where the hood latch were at. You unbolt them, and the hood latch is actually over here on the cable. So there's your hood latch. It's still attached to the cable inside the body. And then you go through, and then there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe it was 6 bolts across the top to actually take out all the connections for, all the bolting connections for that front piece. Now, problem is the way my airbox is designed. This is the hose for my airbox. Okay, so here's my airbox, and this sits right over here. So it's actually going to sit in like, whoop, I got the box upside down there. All right, so it just sits in there like this, but there is a bolt on the front panel right there that you need to take out. And I believe that one was a 10mm, if I remember correctly. So you have to take your air filter out, unbolt this, which also has a bolting connection right there next to, has a bolting connection right there next to the ECR. And then you've got your box. It should just pretty much pull straight out. There is going to be a connector on the back of it, so I can find that real quick. So that loop right there is for a wiring harness, which is right, drop down on, where'd you go? Should be right here. This is what was on the back of the airbox. So that needs to be pulled off there before you can take the airbox out. Once that's out, you can leave the hose, which I already disconnected it, trying to work around taking the whole airbox off, but so that's disconnected. And from there, you'd actually have a couple of electrical connections that you have to pull off of your fan, which is sitting on the ground over there. You've also got a couple of bolts, which I forgot to mention. This brace and this brace right here are actually attached to that bracket. So once you get all that out of there, there's your fan. This fan just drops in, well, you don't drop it in with damage your radiator, but this places in behind the radiator, and you have two electrical connections here. Actually, of course, run the fan. There's 2 bolts on that side, 2 bolts on that side. Somebody previously worked on this car, so 2 of the bolts were actually missing. But those should be 10 millimeters if I'm not mistaken. Now, because I couldn't find any videos online for this, when I went to go take it out, I unplugged the fans like you're supposed to, because 2004, 2006, Dodge Stratus is the same thing as the Chrysler Sebring, so I was able to find some videos, but they kept showing me for the 2.7, so a few minor continuity things there, but like those connectors actually plug back in to here. They just typical, like the Dodge style, Chrysler style, they just snap right in there, and they got a little tab there you push down, pull them out. What I didn't know, which would probably save me a little trouble, is that this is actually a separate wire harness on this device, on this machine, that hooks into there. So I could have pulled the tab from here, which you push that out all the way, and then you can pull this harness out without actually detaching it from the fans. The radiator itself is completely detached from the condenser at this point. The only reason it's still sitting in here is because the condenser is actually just held on by the lines, which I'm assuming are just made out of aluminum like everything else in this car at this point. They're just held on by those lines, so if I take the radiator out, there's nothing for the condenser to balance on, and it hangs off those lines. There's the lines right there, and that could potentially damage the lines, which makes one more headache that I'm not really willing to deal with right now. But you can see your mounting point for your fan is right there, and then there's going to be another one down there. You have your output, your lower hose right here for your radiator. Below that is the other mounting point. My arm's in the way. The other mounting point. Below the mounting point and kind of under the car is your petcock, your drain cock, which is right there. It looks like that little key-shaped thing. Mine, apparently it was sealed in place or something, and it would not open for me, so I actually had to take the lower radiator hose off and just drain it from the lower radiator hose. It's probably the easiest way to go about that. So once you take the 4 bolts off the fan, which is right there, you have to unbolt the condenser from the radiator, and there's actually a mount point. If I can zoom in on it there. There should actually be a screw hole on the side here. And on this side, I believe they're further underneath. Yep, there they are. Okay, there's a mounting point for the condenser back to the radiator, and there's the other one. So you take those 2 screws out, and then you remove the 4 screws from the fan, and it allows you to slide the radiator out, which in my case it's pretty easy. You actually have, kind of hard to see, but there's these clips right here, so you actually have to pull the condenser up, and it slides out of that tab, and then you just lift that completely out, slide the radiator the rest of the way out, and that will allow you to swap out your radiator. And then, of course, like I said, the overflow box actually didn't have to come out, but because it wasn't flushing properly when I drained out the radiator, I went ahead and took that out of there. You gotta be careful with these. There's your lines back to your condenser. And then you've got some hoses and everything down there, so you just gotta be careful so you don't damage any of those in the process. Now the alternator itself, like I said, that's pretty basic. It's just 3 holes or 3 screws holding it in place. And you have this electrical connector. Now, when you put the new one in, if you'll probably have to, like a lot of car parts, you'll have to cannibalize. So make sure you keep the bolts, everything that you take off the car, hold on to them in case you need a spare, or yeah, in case you need a spare. Now with the radiator itself, these posts that are sticking up actually stick up through the hood of the car, or through the front lip of the car, and they have rubber isolation O-rings that surround them to help with vibration and damaging, etc. One of mine is damaged, so I'm hoping when the new radiator comes in, which is today, that that will be included in the box. When you take the radiator off, you can kind of see it there. There's a hole down there at the bottom that's through the bottom of the frame. That is actually going to have isolation O-rings on it as well. There's those. So when you take it out, if your radiator does not come with them, make sure you put those onto the new one to keep your radiator from getting damaged faster than it probably should. I left my belt on because this was going to literally be the easiest way for me to handle this. You can actually see the belt right there. There's the belt. It's still on in the correct diagram pattern. All I did was when I dropped the pulley, it released the belt, so I left it hanging there. So when I go put the new alternator in, all I have to do is loosen up that pulley again, slip that back over the pulley that's actually attached to the alternator, and then release it to let it tighten itself back down. So it's a pretty simple process for the most part. It's just a lot of small parts that you have to make sure you don't lose. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, thank you for watching. Just hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more videos, or if you like what you're seeing. And hopefully I'll have something out to you here soon.